When I was 7 years old, my school announced that it was holding its first annual pet day, and every kid was invited to bring in their pet, and a real live, nationally renowned veterinarian with letters after his name and everything would judge which of us had the best pet. This was going to be huge. I knew that nobody had a pet like mine. Oh, there were tons of dopey old dogs, stinky cats, and even some smelly hamsters, but nobody had a salamander named Godzilla, a glorious specimen of green and gray with a blunt nose and uneven limbs that made it waddle every time it moved. Nobody had that except me. I knew that I was going to win Pet Day. I normally woke up slowly on school days, but on the morning of Pet Day, when my father came in as usual with a mouthful of scope and an atmosphere of Old Spice emanating from him like a tangy force field, I burst out of bed and ran over to the aquarium. Oh, I was so excited. My father just shook his head and walked out of the room. He did that a lot. As my eyes adjusted and peered through the grimy and splotched glass, I realized then that fate can be cruel to a 7-year-old with big dreams. There lay Godzilla, on his back, bulging eyes, dead. Why me? Morning, I carried poor, dead Godzilla downstairs in my trembling hand into the kitchen where my mother was making 7 lunches. No words could accurately sum up my grief, so I simply held out dead Godzilla in front of her face. When she stopped screaming, all she had to say was she was sorry I didn't have a pet to bring into school anymore. What? I responded in confusion. I'm still bringing him to school. Then came the tone. Until I was about 18, I'd say 87% of the things my mom said to me sounded exactly the way she said, "Matthew, you can't bring a dead lizard to school," as if everyone in the world knew that but me. Then she told me to wash my hands. Wash my hands? What? Quickly, I hatched an ingenious plan. I nodded in imitation of an obedient 7-year-old and secretly stuffed dead Godzilla into my school bag. That day at school, I learned a few things. Mainly, I learned that nothing is more awesome to second graders than a totally real live dead thing. Oh, how my classmates marveled and poked the salamander's belly to make sure I hadn't just trained it to sleep, because nobody wants to be fooled by a narcoleptic lizard. Within minutes, the line to see the boring old veterinarian became a circle around dead Godzilla. Oh, they gasped and they prodded. There was a newfound aura of respect about me. As every kid knows, nothing attracts teachers like a circle of children. So when my second grade teacher, Miss Golden, bowled into the middle of the crowd, we scattered like concussion victims, walking in unrecognizable patterns and answering questions by asking to go to the bathroom, a second grader's only defense to a complex world. After an interminable wait in line, finally I was next up to see the bespectacled veterinarian. I proudly stepped forward and presented dead Godzilla to the animal doctor. His eyes widened. He looked back at me. Then he looked back at dead Godzilla, and then back at me. He said, "I'm afraid, son, you do realize that it's, dead?" "Yep," I answered. Oh, I was sure now that victory was mine. No one else had so stunned this learned man of science. This would be a day that would certainly go down in the history of Southridge Elementary. Nowadays, if a child were told his pet were dead, there would probably be grief counseling for the entire grade and a ceremony where we all wrote our thoughts on balloons and let them float away. But things were simpler back then, and he simply handed me dead Godzilla and told me to go wash my hands. What? I stood there stunned. It was then that he called Mrs. Golden over, and then panic set in. A teacher and a doctor getting together to discuss you is never a good thing. Every second grader understands that a hastily called gathering of authority figures to discuss you is never good. And then horror heaped upon horror. I spotted my mother running into the cafeteria with a goldfish in a bag. She'd come to save the day, but it couldn't have been worse timing. When she was still a few feet away, I quickly handed the dead salamander to the vet so she might believe that he'd brought a dead salamander in and not me at all. But she saw through my clever ruse and ripped the dead thing from the confused vet and handed him the goldfish. I wanted to yell, "Wait, I'm not entering a crummy goldfish." I wanted to insist that I was entering a real, live, dead thing. But inherently, I knew my situation was precarious, and silence was probably advisable. It's, very nice, said the dopey old vet about the goldfish. Every kid knows very nice is what grandparents say when your little sister shows them her art project. All my hopes dashed. My mother dragged me out of the room and gave me what for in the hallway. Back then, parents could give what for and how, and nobody thought anything about it. She said bringing Godzilla in was a terrible reflection on the family. I thought to myself, oh, come on, we have 7 kids in the school, and they were all good except me, so there's no way one bad kid would damage the family reputation all that much. But silence was my best option. It was the metaphorical fetal position. The rest of the day was a funeral march. I expected big trouble when I came home. Oh, how long that walk home from school felt. I watched all the other kids walking without a care in the world, laughing and talking, but I was not among them. I awaited some dreadful punishment. But a strange thing happened. It seemed to me that my mother had forgotten about the entire incident. She even had a snack waiting for all of us. She'd seemingly forgotten I gave my family a 1/7 bad reputation. After snack, though, she pulled me aside into the living room. Oh boy, I was expecting it bad. What would it be? Thumb screws? Bamboo? But my mother simply leaned in and whispered that Godzilla was outside in a shoebox and I should bury him. I buried dead Godzilla in the woods behind our home. I still know the spot. When I came back in, she simply told me to wash my hands. Looking back, I realized I never thanked my mother for running out to the store to buy me a goldfish. I've come to realize, though, that parenting is more complicated than I thought. It's not just crime and punishment. Sometimes it's mercy, it's caring, it's understanding. And sometimes it's a pet in a shoebox and some whispers in the living room instead of thumbscrews. Southridge Elementary never did hold its second annual pet day. I hope that wasn't because of me. I didn't have any words to say over Godzilla's grave that day, but looking back, I probably should have said, thanks, Mom. By the way, the goldfish died 4 days later. I flushed him. My name is Matt Archbold. I am the Uncool Dad. My kids drew the pictures. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested in having me come speak at one of your events, please check out my bio at catholicspeakers.com. Thanks.